Everyone, and welcome to the program Business Point on Global Television. I am Samuel Odi. Many thanks for joining on today's edition of the program. Today we'll be extreme tax reforms. Obviously, the president of Nigeria has introduced multiple tax laws and tax policies that some have been passed into law, some are still in the State House awaiting review, but yet some Nigerians have reacted separately to the 4 new bills that were sent to the State House, and some are still holding off to hold on and see what the State House is going to say in line with those new bills that were sent to the House by Mr. President. So we'll be extracting all of those tax reforms, policies that have been in place, and then we'll see how all of these avenues would help curb out inflation, because the CBN, on the other hand, in the International Monetary Fund meeting going on in Washington, D.C., says that they are restricting and then tightening the monetary policy, that doing that is going to help, curb out inflation. Bayo Onanuga, who is the spokesperson of the president, came out and said, despite inflation, we're witnessing the economy is witnessing growth, but on the continent of Africa, Nigeria is number 4 in terms of GDP growth in the continent. So what is no longer new to Nigerians is new tax bills, new tax policies almost on a monthly basis. But we're going to be extracting how these tax laws now would help curb out inflation, and the avenue where International Monetary Fund, the director of Africa, says the subsidy removal was solely all a decision taken by Mr. President, that they don't have any hands in that. We'll be looking at those angles too on today's edition. But before we get right into the whole conversation, I will be going on a quick break, and when we get back, I'll be introducing my guests who will help us extract most of this talking point on today's edition of Business Point. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Business Point on Global Television.
The business world can be dynamic and unpredictable, with headwinds and volatility sometimes becoming an obstacle for players in the business and economy landscape. Watch Business Point on Global Television as Samuel Odi walks you through the twists, turns and curves in bands, stocks and crucial market indices from a global standpoint. Watch Business Point weekdays on Global Television at 11 a.m. West African time. Business Point, this is business.
Yes, many thanks for staying with us. And if you're just joining, we're about to dive right straight into the conversation. And I have my guest here with me, who is a business analyst and also someone that understands Nigerian tax laws very, very much. His name is Mr. Johnson Olugbenro. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning, Mr. Samuel.
Thank you so much for joining on to this edition of Business
Always
Point.
my pleasure to be here.
Yes. So let's start from the ones that we are setting off. 4 bills have been sent. Before we get into IMF, where they've said they have nothing to do with Mr. President taking our subsidy. If they don't have anything, we'll still get back to that conversation, because they are part of our policies, and I know a few things get to pass through them before it gets, to Nigeria. So let's talk about these bills. Though it has not been passed totally, this Nigerian tax bill, Nigerian tax administration bill, Nigerian revenue board establishment bill, and then joint revenue bill. These are the 4 bills that Mr. President sent last week. So, and maybe by this week, we know how swift the Senate House gets when Mr. President sends whichever bill. So let's see. In recent times, you see how swift they get to react to it. So we are getting a response from them hopefully very soon. But what's your reaction to these bills? From what we see, it looks like it's just the bigger boys, corporate guys that is going to bite on.
Yes, you're correct. So if you remember that when the current year's budget was sent to the National Assembly, unlike the prior years where it will normally be accompanied with the Finance Act, what we've been doing in the other years is to try to, support some of the provisions in the budget, in the appropriation bill, with some provisions of finance bill, just to kind of give it some legislative footing. But this year was different. When the bill was sent to the National Assembly, it was sent without the accompanying Finance Act. And the reason for that was because since 2019, we've been having Finance Act, which in itself has been the attempt by government, to address some very urgent loopholes and serious issues within our tax landscape. Not just that, and even our fiscal landscapes in general.
Yes.
So the reasoning this year is that we can't keep amending this. We can't keep doing this patching. If you have a bad road that you really need to do a complete replacement, and then each time you get to patch it. So that's how they came up with this economic stabilization bill. That's the name for the four. It's called
economic stabilization. Yes,
and like you rightly mentioned. So in terms of your question, the truth of the matter is, I have looked at some of the provisions of the excerpt from the bill. Like we've always said, in terms of policy work, I think the committee has done fairly well enough. I think they consulted widely, and one central focus of the bills is to just ensure that we don't keep taxing poverty, and that the people who earn more should also make fair contribution, to the pool. But the major issue and the major fears that we have, and of course, one of the bills is also going to replace the FIRS Establishment Act, just to amend their powers and modifies what FIRS can do and what they cannot do. It will shock you that when you go for tax reconciliation meetings, right? There are things that just because we don't have provisions for them within the FIRS Establishment Act, you can win a case just on technical grounds, just because, not because you are not wrong, but because there are no legislative backing. So you can challenge the powers of FIRS and say, okay, FIRS lacks the power, they are not empowered by law to enforce this kind of taxes. And many of these laws are also very old. When this law came into effect, the way we speak is different from the way we speak now. Particularly within the digital economy landscape. There are words that are very alien to us, and we don't. And the way law works is that if that name is not clearly written in the law, it's very difficult to enforce it. So that's what some of the bills are seeking to do, also to harmonize and consolidate on many of the existing tax laws, which often amount to duplicated efforts, across both federal and state and even local government. So that's what the bill is trying to do. But the fear we have is that we are not sure whether it will be well implemented.
Implementation has been one of the major challenges. We've always seen that policy is looking extremely very, very good on paper, but at the end of the day, we just tend to wonder what really happened, because from what we saw. Well, talking about the rich corporate guys paying more, and then the poverty line in Nigeria. So how do we measure all of this? Because how do we measure those that are rich now and those that are poor in terms of payment of this tax? And again, the State House, it has been rumored that the VAT is going to be increased from 7.5 to 10%. Now we're hearing it's going to be moved and then it's going to be reviewed at 15% if it does get passed. So how key is it going to be now that we have laws in place that would help manage all of this? But the economy itself, it's revamping, and then we've seen Bayo Onanuga says despite the inflation we are witnessing growth in the economy. So can we say that these tax policies that Mr. President have introduced has helped for the past 18 months that he has been on seat?
And so the ones that he has already introduced, which is I think the latest being the withholding tax.
Yes, withholding tax. Yes.
I don't. Well, we can give it to them and say that okay. Well, you can say that, but I don't think it's necessarily as a result of, because the withholding tax regulation was just introduced just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes,
I doubt if we can say that, and in fact that has not even been implemented, by the way. That is going to take effect from 1st of January 2025, although there is the option of election for taxpayers who want to be early adopters. But I'm not sure that that particular law is responsible for whatever growth. If you look at maybe the other reforms in terms of the unification of the exchange rate and maybe the fuel subsidy and all of that, maybe that has accounted for it. But the question then is that the average person on the street, so we are hearing this growth in terms of our maybe foreign reserve.
Yes, around 1 billion monthly base.
But the question is, how does the average man or woman on the street feels in terms of how easy is it for you in terms of your purchasing power, in terms of fuel consumption, energy consumption. You want to look at the cost of living.
Yes.
The cost of running business for the average employee. We also have to look at it from that perspective and balance things up. It's not just enough to be looking at numbers and say, oh, the economy is growing. But when you look at the individuals and households, I'm sure if you interview them, if you go to the street and interview them, you will also know that businesses are also shutting down in their numbers.
Yes.
So the question is, at what expense? Just a few days ago, the petroleum, I think the Market Association, they are saying that
over 10,000. Yes.
Over 10,000 businesses might have to shut down because they are not getting enough demand, and then they can't pay salary. So what's the point? So we can't just be looking at the numbers and saying the economy is growing, but in terms of the real impact on businesses and individuals and households, I don't think it's time to celebrate yet. Maybe in the future things will get better, and that's our prayers. But as of today, in terms of the impact, is really biting.
Okay, looking at those, actually it's biting very, very hard. But looking at all of those now, purchasing power has been cut down. Nigerians are now purchasing. Some have cut down their, feeding pattern. Some that usually 3 square meals, some now 2. Those that used to eat 2 before, some 1. And I hope those that are eating 1 per day are still having food to eat. But looking at those angles now, what can be done? Because for businesses not to close, monetary policy is being very tight. What avenue can be used now to help revamp and then this SME so as shops wouldn't close up?
So what we need to do is to encourage production. They have said that with their mouth, but we don't see that in terms of implementation. This administration actually, that was what was said when they came into office, into power, that they don't want to tax production, that this administration wants to tax consumption. I think I saw a funny analogy by Mr. Yedele, and it's so true. So let's do an experiment. Just put a signboard out there and just say Samuel Odi Enterprises, and watch how many hours it will take before different officers will come. AMAC will come, FCTRS will come, FIRS will come. Before you know it, you are getting served letters. It's just a prank,
yes,
right? But you'll be shocked. So the whole idea is that it's almost as if it's an offense to run a business.
Business.
When in the ideal situation, your government actually should be supporting you and be going, oh, we've seen what you are trying to do. How can we help you? How can we support you? Oh, do you know that you can have access to this kind of loan? Or are you aware that we have this kind of a program that is running that you can take advantage of? That is what government needs to do, because at the end of the day, you can increase the tax to even 100%.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, you discover that if businesses are not growing and more businesses are dying, in the long run, it's going to be being penny wise, pounds foolish. So, and which is what we have seen. So you have to encourage productivity within the system, and that's what we have said, that it's not enough to just say, okay, fine, we know that we have a revenue challenge, we are doing very badly, and as a matter of fact, part of the reason why we are even having the revenue challenge is because we are not even collecting the taxes well. So we have over 60 official taxes that are being collected across federal, state, and local government, and it will shock you from the data that NBS reported.
Yes.
When you put all these numbers together, everything for last year, everything amounted to maybe about 50 billion.
Yeah.
That is not even up to half of what South Africa alone collected from one item of tax. You're not even their total tax revenue. From one item of tax. You look at Kenya, you look at other
Africa. Yes.
So because we are not even collecting it rightly. So rather than increasing the numbers indefinitely, which we've seen them do all the time, we were saying, okay, let's take a pause, let's harmonize the system, let's consolidate, rather than having these, because if you have to collect 60 different kind of taxes, you need to employ people to enforce it. You need to, in some cases, have offices and pay rent and all of so. By the time you look at the cost of collection, when you deduct all of that, what is left is close to nothing. But just imagine you have, instead of 60, maybe you have 5 or even 10. You have fewer people to collect it, and then you can now consolidate on experience. I have always been of the opinion that, for instance, the average person that has taxes to pay to Federal Inland Revenue Service, that same person most likely have taxes to pay to the state and local government, but because they have employees that are being paid salaries, they have transactions that may attract, withholding taxes that may be payable to the state, in some instances. So rather than having all these multiple agencies collecting, it's not better if we have one person. Nobody is arguing with you whether it's your money or not. But say, let one agency collect on your behalf. And then they can distribute. So they have more experience, they understand the system better. Because what we have seen with most of the state, but why they struggle with revenue collection is because they are not experienced.
Okay.
At the end of the day, because in the name of we want to be the one collecting our revenue by ourselves, at the end of the day, they are not collecting as much. If they go to FRS already has the data. They can tell that based on our data, we know this business, we know the number of staff, we know how much they have reported as salaries in the audited report.
Yes.
So we can help you ensure that they have paid the correct payee taxes, on that number. So when we harmonize and we consolidate like that, we will even do more, rather than just always increasing the numbers.
But what do you think is the major challenge now with Nigerian economy? Because we've seen we used to be number 1 in Africa, now we're back to number 4. So what do you think is the cost of this downtime of Nigerian economy?
Of course, the data don't lie, and when you look at us going from number 1 to number 4, mostly what is accountable for it is the exchange rate.
Okay.
It may not necessarily be that the businesses are doing less in terms of numbers. But by the time, because you are now going to, you are going to convert it, maybe in dollar equivalent and all of that. So so if you're doing 100 million, if you were doing 100 million 5 years ago, and you are still doing the same 100 million today, nothing has changed. But because of the exchange rate, by the time that same amount is converted, you may discover that you are now number 10. Even though in terms of your Naira revenue, you might not necessarily be doing worse off. But even the Naira revenue has even gotten worse off. So even if you're not doing worse off, because of the exchange rate, you will find yourself even far below other people. But even for the average business person, you even discover that even in terms of their Naira income, the numbers are dropping because of the purchasing power of the individuals. So the average Nigerians people now have to prioritize their expenses, just like you mentioned earlier. So you people are doing less. You want to just concentrate on essentials. Even the essentials, you want to be sure that is
very
what is
important.
just needed for survival.
Yes.
You are putting your resources on. In terms of transportation, you want to go to places that are very, very important. We've seen it even in churches. You see the car park are getting empty because people now don't
mostly drive.
They don't drive the way they used to be. So of course, so the apple won't fall too far from the tree. So by the time you put all of these indicators together, you can see why we are doing poorly and why we are number 4. And I hope it stays that way. I hope we don't end up being number 10 if things continue like this.
We just hope we get higher. But let's look at this other angle. Okay, let's talk about this. Let me get a reaction. Nigeria joining BRICS as partner country. How do you react to that? And again, just still at the meeting going on, Mr. Cardoso made mention of Nigeria applying to generate a monthly FX remittance to $1 billion on a monthly basis. Do you think with the membership with BRICS now, that would help facilitate Nigeria getting its mark that is set for itself?
Yes, it's a welcome development. We've always said that. And if you look at most of the countries,
yes.
The countries like China, Singapore, that came out of where we are now,
yes,
and are doing better. These are some of the things that they did. And they also didn't necessarily implement IMF policies, hook, line, and sinker. I don't want to say that maybe IMF is, they are not necessarily bad, but what they fail to realize at the end of the day is that a lot of times solutions have to be localized.
Yes.
So you have to seek your own indigenous solutions to most of your problems. So Nigeria joining BRICS is a good development because if it is done well, it's just that Nigeria is a very funny country. We've seen situations in which other people have engaged and they have gotten some kind of outcomes. But in our own case, sometimes you do it and you are getting the exact opposite. But in terms of BRICS, we expect that should at least, at the minimum, strengthen our Naira.
Okay.
We hope that we should start seeing Naira, beginning to appreciate in value because of the new arrangement with BRICS.
And again, as well as also the Crude for Naira initiative, that
is now in force.
Okay.
Even though that has its own issues, but
yes,
let's leave that.
Talking about that, but I actually also had a quick brief conversation with someone around that. But in 2 minutes, how well do you think that is actually working? The Naira for Crude initiative.
So it's supposed to be a brilliant idea, but now we've seen Dangote suing the NNPCL and all of that. It's a good development, but I don't know. It appears some persons, some high powers within the system seem to be frustrating that effort. And what we've also seen is that it's as if we have already eaten our future from the previous administration. So we've made some commitment that still makes it very impossible for us to implement it 100%. So I think the based on some arrangement that the previous administration has had with some investors,
yes.
I think we may not see it fully implemented 100% because we've done this crude. We've used our crude as collateral
for a whole lot
and for a whole lot of things. It's the reality of Nigeria.
Sadly, and another aspect to hold this same conversation is that crude is an international commodity, and then the FX exchange rate is still biting hard. Nigerian Naira has not gained momentum, and if you have to even produce or refine here locally, if you need to go get the equivalent of Naira, in Naira before you can be able to purchase. So on one note, yes, you need Naira, that is if you're doing anything locally, but at the other hand, if the exchange rate, if nothing happens within the exchange rate and Naira doesn't get more momentum, it's more like you're still purchasing with the current rates in the foreign market. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Johnson, for joining us on today's edition of Business Point. Really appreciate you. Yes, sir. And that's how much time will permit us to take on today's edition of our Business Point. My name is Samuel Odi. I'll see you again tomorrow as we x-ray other angles of business. Bye for now.